Good morning, world. This is Awesome Alan starting his saga on how to establish a solid, sustainable, worldwide goods trading system that does not rely on government regulations or tariffs. Okay? Anyway, just a brief introductory to myself and my background, right? First off, I'm not an economist or a politician, so I don't see the world the way they do, okay? I'm actually a practical 365-degree computer software analyst with a long special interest in global trading and supply chain. Think of me as a real-world practitioner. As I said, I look at situations and problems from all angles, up, down, left, right, inside out. Okay. And then I come up with a practical solution that meets all those requirements, right? That's what I do for a living, okay? And it definitely applies to the global goods trading system, as you'll see in this video, okay? So I know that one guy trying to solve the world's problems sounds like some sort of pie-in-the-sky dreamer stuff, but it's really not. Okay, it is doable, but it will require global cooperation. Okay, I'm happy to lead here with a plan and a plan B and a C and a D. I always have a plan, but I can't execute the plan all by myself. Okay, I started this YouTube channel so that I can inspire the world to follow my ideas rather than just keep beating their heads against a brick wall, which does not work. It's painful, and I know. Okay, so here's the high-level skinny, right? All countries in the world have strengths and weaknesses, okay? Just as people do, if you think about it, right? Countries obviously have physical, geographic boundaries, which are fine as is. I mean, this is not the 19th century. We don't need to change anything here. No reason to change. Okay? Countries also have resources, okay, that impact their economic growth, including natural resources, infrastructure, people, their education levels and experience levels, okay. All of these are needed to build the country's economic growth through global trade. Okay? Success here will keep their citizens happy and healthy. All right? And I mean, if you were the president of a country, right, isn't that what you really want? A happy, prosperous, population that supports what you're doing. Okay? The key to success here, all right, is for every country in the world, rich or poor, to focus on what they do best and not waste time doing things that are not globally competitive in. Okay? So how do countries figure this out, right? Well, understand that what makes a country competitive in the global trading market is to make a physical product, right, that other countries want to import. Okay, very, very simple here, conceptually. That means that whatever they offer must be cheaper, better, and come with faster customer delivery than any other country. Okay? Of course, this is a balancing act, you could focus more on price than quality or delivery. Okay? So, American importers of Mexican widgets could choose to minimize the cost and be okay with 1 month delivery, okay? Compared to, like, say, importing a better quality widget from Canada who also can deliver within a week, okay, but at a much higher cost, all right? They're not cheap, okay? Know your market. Know your strengths and weaknesses, okay? Push your strengths and try to minimize your weaknesses. Major key to success here, okay? All right, so another key for building a country's profitable trading system is that countries have to live in today's world. But They must be constantly tracking where the global economy is going, looking for opportunities, have a plan to exploit those opportunities before any other country can. Okay? Establish your market, guys. Hold that market and do not let it get away from you. Okay? So what hinders this strategy? What makes this solution tough to achieve? Well, a lot of things actually, right? As world citizens, okay, we have to allow all countries to manage their own affairs. We really do, okay? For example, if we live in the United States, no one here should care or pay any attention to Mexican politics, culture, internal procedures, or anything like that, okay? All we should care about is Mexico's contribution to global trading. If we can help, great. Nothing else really matters, okay, really. Of course, there are exceptions, right? For instance, you can't allow illegal drugs and arms smuggling across the border. It's bad for everyone, right? Yeah. But, there must be some controls to protect the borders, and I understand that, okay? We should only allow imports of goods and services that are good for this country, okay? If it's dangerous, let it. If it's not dangerous, let it through. But no barriers. Okay, just don't hassle things. Immigrants crossing borders, though, are actually a different subject. Okay, I promise to do a video on this sometime in the future on how to manage this, because I know how to do this. Okay, it's not that bad. Right, so stay tuned. It's going to be fun when I get to that one. Another problem is that countries do mess with each other in the wrong way. Okay? For instance, Iran and Iraq do not like each other's religious practices, so they consider each other to be enemies. Okay? And are always thinking about ways to invade each other's country, to force them to change. All right? When you think about this, it's a really stupid thing to do because it has a negative impact on both countries, right? They should be trading with each other, not trying to change their religions, okay? They're focused on the wrong things. They're next-door neighbors, for God's sakes. They make natural trading partners. Take advantage of that. Cheesy peasy, what could be simpler? It's frustrating. Anyway, another thing that makes my global trading strategy actually currently impossible, okay, to implement is the use of tariffs and government controls to restrict this global supply chain. Okay, this must stop, guys. This must stop, and I'll tell you why. Okay, remember my widget example earlier? Okay. Back in the 1960s, okay, the USA had many, many large widget manufacturing plants here and made thousands of widgets that would be sold to millions of U.S. customers, okay? This had been going on for decades. It didn't just start in the 60s. It's been going on for decades. Why? Because no other country in the world could make widgets better, faster, or cheaper than the U.S., okay? Wages here were low, cost of delivery cheap, factories were cheap to build, lots of reasons, okay? Post-World War II reconstruction efforts helped a lot too, literally we were the only ones that could do that, okay? But, unfortunately things did change over time, right? The 1970s saw large increases in wages, government regulations, construction and maintenance costs, okay, et cetera, et cetera. Results, well, the U.S. consumers paid for all this. They did, unfortunately. It came out of their pocket. It's called inflation, which was ridiculous back in the 70s. I remember that, mostly due to government interference. Government stayed away from it. We wouldn't add that. You remember Nixon's WIM buttons, whip inflation now? They were so cute. I just love those things. But, I remember that. Probably nobody else did. Anyway. The world's response? Well, during the 1980s, Mexico started to build widget factories to make widgets to export to the U.S. at a lower cost. That's what killed USA widget manufacturing during the 80s. Okay? But, of course, all those lost factories and jobs, okay, weren't really lost. They were just replaced by others that did work out well economically for us, such as high tech, war equipment, that sort of thing, right? And there's always focus on the future because it's changing and new things are coming up all the time. Grab onto them, don't live in the past, right? Okay? The primary thing that's hurting us now economically is government economic regulations. Inevitably, these kill the economy, and tariffs are especially bad killers. Okay? Let's talk about this more. I'd like to start off by clarifying what a tariff is and what it is not. Okay? It's actually pretty simple, straightforward. Most people don't understand this. Okay, the media does, but they don't ever publicize what I'm about to tell you. You might be able to read about this, find some specialized news article or magazine article, that talks about this, but it's generally not well known. Okay, all countries currently use tariffs to manage imports. It's bad, but that's reality. Okay, I'm going to use President Trump's current tariff strategy as an example, since that seems to be all we hear about in the news nowadays. Anyway, here's what it is and why he's doing it. Okay, we've all heard his comments on this subject, so I'm not going to repeat them. I'd like to upfront say that Donald Trump is not a stupid man. He really is not. Okay, he's well educated and experienced. He knows how the tariff system works. Okay, he knows everything I'm about to tell you. All right, but when he speaks, he puts a political spin on it because he's trying to sell an objective. Okay, in this case, Mexican tariffs. He wants to turn back the hands of time for widget manufacturing and reconstruct it in the U.S. He doesn't need to, but he wants to. He wants to force this by using tariffs to make Mexican widgets, more expensive. It's not going to work for many reasons, but it's his goal. Okay, I try to help him, but he won't listen to me. So there you go. All right. A tariff is what is a tariff? Well, it's really an import tax. Okay, plain and simple, right? The U.S.-based importer pays that tax, and the importer pays the tax, and not the U.S. consumers. It's the importer. Okay, it's paid by the U.S. importer. All right, but let's be practical here. All right, the cost of the tariff could ultimately be passed to the U.S. consumer. All right, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, here's an example. Right, let's say the tariff on Mexican factory made widgets exports to the United States is 50%. Okay. Oh, by the way, I know there are exceptions on tariffs and stuff like that, but let's stick with me first. Okay. So, for example, the U.S. Importer's price for from the Mexican factory without the tariffs is $100 a widget. Okay. A 50% tariff will push the importer's cost to $150 per imported tariff. Okay. $100 to the Mexican factory and $50 to the U.S. government for the tariff. All right. So what do we do? Well, the importer is going to try to smooth out that hit over his supply chain. Okay. He's going to ask the Mexican factory to reduce its price to, say, $80 a widget. Okay. He'll ask his customer, the U.S. wholesaler that he sells to increase the amount paid to him by, say, $20 a widget. Okay. If the importer does this successfully, he will still take a hit, but it won't be as hard, right? It'll cost him $10 instead of $50. Okay. The wholesaler, however, is being forced to cooperate with his importer. Okay. He must figure out how to handle his financial hit. Okay. He has a couple of choices. He can either swallow it whole himself, or try to pass the $28 tariff hit to the importer to the retail chain he sells to. right? So he's going to try to increase his price to the retail chain, okay? The chain then has to decide how much to pass on to the consumer, their customer. Will they increase the retail price to the consumer by $20 or eat some or all of that increase? Okay, you follow me, right? This is the way the supply chain works. This is how tariffs work in the real world and why they may or may not affect the final product cost to the consumer. Okay, a common fear in the American consumers is that the price of their widget will go up 50% overnight. And that's totally not true. And now you know why. Okay. Another interesting twist on this tale is Trump not liking India buying oil from Russia. Okay. He wants them to stop doing that, right? I mean, he has threatened tariffs on India oil on India oil that they buy from Russia. But as we know from earlier this talk, that's not possible. That's not how tariffs work, okay, despite of what he says. He can, however, attack India's exports to the U.S. and use U.S. tariffs in retaliation for India-Russian oil imports, okay? I don't think he's ever really going to do this, but we'll see where it goes, because it's legally possible, okay? Anyway, I want to tell you, this is a little side note here. I want to give you a kind of a real-life Allen story about India export story that actually is for me personally, okay? Just take a minute. Recently, I wanted to buy a 1930s replica style floor fan, okay, for my living room. Unfortunately, that style of fan is no longer legal to make here, okay? So, but not in India. They can make that style fan. So I was able to find one over there and import it into my living room. No muss, no fuss. Works great. Love the style. Moral of the story is, don't be afraid to look outside the USA for unusual things that are not available here. Okay? Chances are very good you'll find it. Okay, at a reasonable price, by the way. All right. Anyway, never a dull moment with global trading. I just love all this stuff. And, anyway, that's about it for this telecast, okay? I hope you've learned a lot. Soon I'll be recording some more current event-driven global trade telecasts that I'm sure will be fun to hear, too, if you're interested in the subject, okay? So please, 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 subscribe to me so that I can keep you in the loop, okay? Knowledge is indeed power. So until next time, this is Awesome Al in support of global trading. Goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, hoodoo, bonopar, arrivederci.